welcome to Convos from the Couch from LifeStance Health. I'm Nikki Lianza, and I'm really excited to talk with Lynette Broom today, a registered dietitian who's going to help us understand eating disorders. So Lynette, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Nikki. I'm happy to be here. So just a little blurb about me, Lynette Broom. I am located in Southern California, so I work in the North Orange County area. I am one of LifeStance's, I think I'm their only dietitian in California, which is kind of unique. So I have the ability to connect with a lot of really cool therapeutic minds and people within LifeStance. And I specialize in eating disorders. So we'll kind of get into that in a little bit. The different types of eating disorders, our spectrum of disordered eating to eating disorders. And I work too quite a bit with people of color and women of color in kind of bringing them into the fold of diagnosis and access to treatment and things along that line as well. So those are my little areas I work in.
You definitely sound like you have lots of knowledge around this topic. I definitely appreciate that.
Thank you.
And so to kick us off, can we start by talking about the various types of eating disorders?
Yeah, definitely. So we have some kind of like the big three, I would call it, within eating disorders that people are pretty familiar with. So we have anorexia nervosa, we have bulimia nervosa, and we have binge eating disorders, abbreviated as BED. So those are our big three that we know we have the most research about, we know the most about, that often get the most diagnoses. We have others though that are a little bit more rare that we don't see as often, but things like pica, and things like ARFID, which is avoidant restrictive intake disorder. And pica, of course, is the desire to eat non-nutritive substances, but are categorized within that spectrum of eating disorders. So those are the big three that people are most familiar with, that we hear the most about.
With the ARFID, can you just tell us a wee bit more about that? Because I think that out of the ones you're describing, most people probably are familiar with the other ones, but maybe not the ARFID, I believe. Can you tell us about it?
So people with ARFID, more times than not, they will experience maybe significant weight loss and maybe some malnutrition and or nutrient deficiencies, but based around not necessarily the desire for weight loss or the desire or the fear that comes with anorexia nervosa of being overweight or what would be perceived to be overweight. So their restriction is usually tied more to, it can sometimes be textural things. Sometimes it could be maybe some trauma or things that happen as a child or some negative experiences they had connected to food and intake that are kind of more texture, or just other things connected to restricting food, not connected to the fear of weight gain and the desire to be extremely thin that we see accompanied with anorexia nervosa. So the intention there is not the same, but we see some of the same manifestations with significant weight loss, nutrition deficiencies, and things like that.
So this isn't merely an individual who is just a picky eater. It sounds like it goes even more beyond that, especially if there's malnutrition happening.
Yeah, definitely. So avoiding foods, sometimes groups of foods. Sometimes there's a correlation we've seen too with individuals that have diagnosis with autism too, with just wanting to avoid certain textures or color sometimes can be a thing for people. So it's more in alignment with that than not wanting to gain weight or fear of weight gain.
Got you. Thank you. That's very helpful in explaining the difference.
Absolutely.
Now, speaking of difference, wanting to help people understand the difference between an eating disorder and disordered eating. So can you help us understand that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know for a lot of clinicians too, as we're gaining more knowledge around eating disorders, and it's just become more prevalent and just more discussed, because it can still be very taboo just within the larger culture, and then just even within, within one's own individual culture as well. We have more information kind of about eating disorders in general. But you will know that we think about eating disorders, disordered eating kind of on a spectrum. And so with an eating disorder, we have clear kind of diagnostic criteria for an eating disorder. So, you're experiencing these certain symptoms for so many times a week over so many months. And then we have defining kind of criteria within each type of eating disorder. Versus disordered eating, it doesn't cleanly fit necessarily into one of those diagnostic criteria with anorexia, bulimia, et cetera. But there are definite things kind of going on. And so what you'll see a lot of times is people that may may weigh their food, may excessively count calories around their food. Orthorexia isn't an official diagnosis yet within the DSM, but we see a lot of those behaviors associated with orthorexia that we would find. Yeah. So orthorexia, you see a lot of things with a lot of conversation or dialogue around, very clean eating or purity around eating. There's, lots of restriction that happens of entire categories of food sometimes, or kind of the obsession sometimes with organic eating, very, very rigid. So lots of rigidity around time, around quantity, around calories. And so we find people that are ascribed to kind of this more orthorexic or could be defined as orthorexic. We would definitely look at that as disordered eating. So it doesn't really fit cleanly, but definitely some things going on there, just behavior wise.
And it's making me think at times that I've worked with clients who maybe initially were coming in to get help with anxieties or depression, things like that. Yeah. And as we were continuing to meet with and talk about things, that I would come to soon realize that would be truly what I would see as some disordered eating going on, and how it was like hidden in there, that when I first met them, wasn't aware that those issues were coming about, but then really saw it kind of sneak in as I continued to meet with them. Do you find that that's something that you've navigated before or heard of?
Yeah, definitely. And so a lot of our chronic dieters too would kind of fall in that disordered eating kind of space. And so a lot of times clinicians, there'll be some shock sometimes where maybe it'll come up, maybe they're coming into a 2:00 session and they haven't maybe eaten anything. And maybe they're not able to maybe really be present and do the work and things like that. And maybe that comes out and you're like, wow, that doesn't feel like that's, in alignment with, just healthy eating or having a healthy relationship with food. Once you dig a little deeper, there's a lot of connection to lots of other things tied to maybe why they're not eating or restricting if that's what they're experiencing.
And I think we can't have this conversation about eating disorders or disordered eating without bringing up just societal pressures, or even looking at celebrities and their influence, or social media. How do you go about guiding clients with navigating just those pressures?
Yeah, definitely. So diet culture is huge. And I think so much of what's happened as we've continued to move forward is there's this feeling of wanting to be healthy, quote unquote, whatever that kind of means. But just so much pressure and so much kind of focus in defining now almost as dieting being a lifestyle thing. So that's like a big marketing thing now. So we have something like a Noom, which is huge, but their entire marketing employs this idea that we're doing, CBT and these are lifestyle changes. Anything that's kind of requiring you to count and quantify and measure your food is, that's just a diet kind of marketed in a different way. But a lot of that language has kind of been collapsed in with the diet, and it's very tricky and it's hard to navigate for people.
For sure. I think you mentioned Noom.
Yeah.
Is that an app? I believe that's an app. I've heard about it.
Yeah, it is.
Do you know much more about the app?
So they do a lot of like real flowery language that it's kind of like, do you really have the professionals in that structure that can really, you know what I mean? Because these are treatment modalities from like licensed professionals that have a lot of experience, but they're throwing around words like CBT and, lifestyle change and things like that. But essentially you are logging your food, and the entire connection is that, you're not good as you are and you need to lose weight. I mean, if we're just being honest,
we're being honest. You're right.
That is the driving force of that. And that in itself is problematic. That one has to change your size to have value. And so that's the crux of kind of what that it's a diet. You know what I mean?
And I appreciate your candor.
Dressed up diet.
I think if you're going to as a participate in an application like that, also be mindful of like, that it's not a replacement for true like cognitive behavioral therapy and things like that.
No. But it sounds, if to an untrained ear that, oh, this sounds great. This is totally different. This is not, this is not a diet. It absolutely is. You are calorie restricting more or less, and kind of masked as being mindful. And there is a place for mindfulness within eating, but it's not counting calories and measuring and putting your weight in and things like that.
I hear you. I think the beauty industry would topple if we all just knew that we are already good enough and beautiful enough and all that. I think if we had that message and organically, it would make such a big difference that we'd probably crumble that whole industry, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it's, I mean, the basis of the diet industry is that people are not successful with the objective of being weight loss. If, you know, people were successful, quote unquote, right? They would cease to exist. So their business is built on people not being successful.
Right. So isn't that interesting? And I hope this really opens the eyes up to a lot of our listeners and viewers to kind of think of it from that perspective, for sure.
Definitely. But like you said, the bigger thing, you know, the silver lining in it all is, you know, your value is not inherent in the size body you exist in this world.
Right, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Now, shifting gears a little bit, can you tell us a little bit about what is intuitive eating?
Yeah. So actually 2 Southern California dietitians were the ones that kind of coined this term. And it's just been this huge phenomenon. Most of our treatment centers in Southern California for eating disorders really absorb that and use that in their treatment. And so it's this idea that, you know, no food, there's no such thing as good and bad food. You know, we have food for different reasons to nourish our body, food for pleasure, you know, looking to value ourselves outside of our size. Looking in just even the language. So not exercise as so much as movement, joyful movement. What does that look like? And so there's 10 kind of guiding principles around that. And it just allows people, it's just an alternative kind of, I guess, reality to diet culture, and really connecting to the fact that we naturally kind of start as intuitive eaters as children. And it's not until we have kind of external noise and influence that we start even questioning this idea of hunger and fullness and body size and all of these things that diet culture kind of, you know, shoves on us. So really an alternative perspective, and just mindset to dieting and diet culture.
I love that. I love the idea of just joyful movement, you know. I think the idea of thinking of exercise, you know, it's like, the association with it of like, but when you say, let's do just some joyful movement, I'm down for some joyful movement. That sounds amazing. Yes.
Completely different mindset.
Completely. And it's and ultimately it is exercise, but you know, you're doing it joyfully. You're wanting to do it, you know. So I think what a great mind shift and mindset, for sure.
And it leaves space for everybody's and diverse bodies too. When we talk about things as far as movement, so we think about people that have different abilities and different capacities to move. So what does that mean to be inclusive of people that have different capabilities too?
Excellent point too. Very excellent point. Now, tell me what factors might inhibit some people from maybe seeking eating disorder treatment? Or even disordered eating treatment?
Definitely. So I think access is a big thing. So when we think about kind of access to resources, location is a big thing for a lot of people. So when we think about eating disorder treatment centers, just location for so many people. So for a lot of people of color, unfortunately, that exists in maybe certain areas or certain neighborhoods, that access is not, there are not treatment centers necessarily location wise that are accessible. And I think just a larger kind of understanding too, that it's still very taboo, especially once you break down within different cultures. It's very taboo to have an eating disorder, to talk about food. Different cultures talk about food and bodies differently. And then I think too, just from a professional kind of perspective, just the underdiagnosing that happens. So, you know, seeing an eating disorder, or our idea perhaps sometimes of an eating disorder looks a certain way. So somebody doesn't present even gender-wise, a certain way or certain look that we think an eating disorder is, not even screening for that or looking for that. So that's significant.
Great point, for sure. Can you walk us through of how you might help your clients navigate, you know, their eating disorders or disordered eating specifically, of like what you had them do?
Yeah. What was the second part?
Just what you have them do. Like, how is it that you're supporting them? What do you have them do? Are you looking at certain, are you looking at food and menu stuff? Or are you looking at just teaching them intuitive eating?
So absolutely. So it depends on, you know, kind of what point of the spectrum and treatment and things the individual is at. I think my general approach is similar with everyone. I think you definitely have to come from a place of, you know, cultural competency and understanding the diversity of the individuals that you will see that present with disordered eating or eating disorders. But my treatment in general is the same. So we definitely talk about food. I talk about food more in a space of like a meal structure.
Okay.
And again, depending on where you're at, as far as if you are really deep in an eating disorder, that's going to look a little different. That may require a little bit more structure depending on what type of eating disorder. But generally speaking, we talk about things as a meal patterning. What is our patterning that we're having around food? And so I always tell people, I'm a dietitian, right? So I'm never going to tell you not to eat fruits and vegetables and things like that. That's not really the problem. It's more so exploring what is your relationship with food? What is your understanding of food? What is your historical family understanding of food that you are dealing with? What will be sustainable? I think sustainability, when I work with folks maybe that are on a disordered eating kind of space, because anyone can go online and find a meal plan, right? So it's not necessarily about that. It's about understanding your relationship with food, what will work for you, what's sustainable. And I never take anything off the table. So I always say, like, I'm an addition dietitian, not subtraction. So whatever we're doing, we're going to add to what you're doing and enhance it. We're never taking anything away. And I think that's really important.
So I think a lot of the key, what I hear you saying, is helping a person maybe change their maladaptive relationship with food.
Absolutely.
Even things that maybe they grew up with, and just as a family dynamic of an unhealthy relationship with food. So I think that's your main thing, looking at patterns and looking at how to change that relationship. It sounds like.
Yeah. So always starting there, and then always starting from a place of positivity and self-love, because how we can't hate ourselves into changing. So if that's our departure, that doesn't feel good, and we're not going to make any progress. So how do we start from a place that I'm good enough as I am, but there are some changes I'd like to make? Wonderful. Let's talk about what those look like. And it's not going to be a calorie restricted, diet where there's all these can't. It's like, no, what do we want to enhance? What can we add?
And it's interesting because I think people do come from a perspective of like just feeling guilty or beating themselves up, like just really lacking self-compassion. So it sounds like what you're emphasizing of like being gentle with yourself, being compassionate with yourself.
Absolutely.
So important for sure. Absolutely. Emphasizing the self-love as opposed to restriction and negativity.
Absolutely. And so always starting there, and that takes quite a bit of time. So a lot of times people think of a dietitian like, I'm coming to you, I want to accomplish X, or maybe it's I want to lose X, or whatever it may be. And that we don't get to that for maybe ever, because that's not really what my objective ever is with people.
May I ask what led you to be interested in becoming a dietitian?
Yeah, so I have always, I'm a food person, as most kind of dietitians are. And I did in my nutrition degree, this is actually my second degree. So I knew I wanted to be a dietitian early on. I got a little scared when I saw the course load with biochem and whatnot, but I came back around to it. I just love food. I love what food's able to do. I love the connection. I think that's a big part too. So a lot of the work that I do with people too is this idea that food is connection. It's a social connection to people. It's a shared history with people. Food should be happiness, all these positive things that are associated with food. So I love this idea that food has the ability to kind of connect people. And it's a cultural kind of story, if you will, at times. And just traveling really exposed that for me quite a bit too. And so that to me is really meaningful and really powerful. So I like to really try to bring that to my clients.
Just, bringing up like just traveling, and when you see how other cultures celebrate eating and taking their time with it, and it's really a whole thing. I think in our American society, it's just something that's just quick sustenance, let's kind of shove it in and go. And so that kind of really fast forward food kind of like idea, and being Italian, of Italian descent, of like really looking at sitting down, having the meal, enjoying the company of the meal is so key in just helping your relationship with food as that connection. For sure. Any other takeaways you'd like to share with our listeners and our viewers about eating disorders or disordered eating?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that, is just so important for people to know is that eating disorder, there is no kind of poster child, if you will, for what an eating disorder looks like. And so a lot of times people that exist in different size bodies, maybe larger bodies sometimes, are glossed over and not seen as, well, you don't have an eting disorder or disordered eating, because there's this idea of what an eating disorder looks like. So really just opening our mind to what that looks like. And again, the focus with food, unfortunately, so much in our culture is intrinsically tied at this point to the size of one's body. So really just kind of detaching that piece too, you know, how you exist in your body has nothing to do with what you eat or what you don't eat necessarily. So I think those would be probably the two biggest things. There is no one look of an eating disorder, and just really disassociating this idea of food and intake with one's body or body size.
Love that. My gosh, Lynette, thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge on this topic. And I think your statements in helping us even shift our view of what disordered eating is, what eating disorders are, or just our relationship with food is just so key to help people maybe make those steps to change their own relationship with food and stuff like that. So I thank you again for coming on and educating us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you very much.